From a Make in India perspective, it's very, very clear that there is confidence about the fact that this could perhaps be the inflection point as far as India's manufacturing ambition and manufacturing prowess is concerned. There is momentum that needs to be built on. There are, of course, impediments still in the way that need to be addressed. And who better to understand what the road ahead looks like as far as policy interventions and policy initiatives to truly ensure that we do make in India for India and make in India for the world than the DPIIT Secretary. Mr. Singh, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Let me start by asking you for your own assessment of the performance of the Make in India program over the past 10 years. How would you rate it?
So, you will recall that when we launched it in 2014, the focus was really on a campaign to, a kind of vocal for local, Make in India, to create an enabling, facilitative environment for business. So there were initiatives like the ease of doing business rankings for states. There were, there was a huge focus on logistics, on improving our physical infrastructure. Over time, it also spilled over into our digital infrastructure. We also tried to further liberalize our FDI policy, and that process continues with the recent cabinet announcement on liberalization of the FDI policy for space sector, which also DPIIT piloted. So those were the sort of enabling factors, and thereafter you could say that the government further walked the talk when it came to Make in India by launching the missions like the production-linked incentive scheme for 14 sectors of the economy and a separate semicon mission for the semiconductor side. All of these are meant to ensure that our fairly abysmal, contribution of our manufacturing sector to the GVA of the economy, which in the recent interim budget's economic review is shown at about 17.4%. That's not very far from the contribution of agriculture. That's how we can really bump it up. But the good news is that there is some sustained growth happening in this sector, particularly in the last few years, and we hope to take it further.
Well, speaking about taking it further, let me unpack some of those issues that you raised, and let's talk about the PLI schemes. 14 PLI schemes that have been rolled out, of course, at different stages through the COVID period specifically. Which are the schemes that you believe have delivered on the promise and the potential? Which are the schemes that you believe more work needs to be done? In our last conversation, you also said that there were 2 or 3 schemes that would require some tweaks. If you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay, so let me start by saying that the scheme so far has got subscriptions from about 746 industrial applicants across these 14 sectors. It has led to commitments on the investment side of about 3 lakh crores. It has led to exports of 1 lakh crores. It has led to sales of about 8.7 lakh crores. And so far we've disbursed, at the last count, about 5,000 crores as incentive. In terms of which sectors have done the most well, I would say electronics and mobile manufacturing, food processing, white goods, pharma, including bulk drugs and medical devices. All of these sectors have even though some of them are in the gestation period, but the investment commitments and the projections on things like employment, etc., are as per what was committed when these were taken to, before the government for approval. A few sectors like textiles, steel, are where there is some need for perhaps greater flexibility in terms of product lines, etc., which we are working on. But these, I would say, are slightly lagging behind the original targets. But with the increased flexibility that we intend to bring into these schemes, which are now pending approval, we hope these will also start taking off.
Okay, so, 2 sectors identified, specifically steel as well as textiles, where you believe that perhaps more needs to be done to give the PLI scheme a boost. But there are demands already coming in, sir, saying that extend the PLI scheme further. Of course, it is a 5-year period that the government has rolled out the PLI schemes for, according to their date of notification. Is that a legitimate ask at this point in time? Do you believe that perhaps a longer window needs to be provided?
So where a longer window is required, that of course could be looked at. In terms of new PLIs, so, whenever we have discussions with industry, some segment or the other does ask for a new PLI. At the moment, I would say we are not looking at that. We are looking at improving the implementation of the existing ones. And in the future, of course, nothing is off the table. But as of now, we are looking at completing these ongoing schemes well.
Okay, so could extend the time period as well as bring more sectors under PLI schemes. I would imagine that that is now going to be something post the elections, if at all.
I would imagine so, yes.
Let me ask you about FDI, because that's another important aspect that you brought up. And of course, the last few years through COVID, etc., we did see a very sharp surge as far as FDI inflows are concerned. But in the last year, 2023, we've seen a decline. And I know that when we spoke previously, you said that you believe that this decline is temporary. What would you attribute the decline to? And are you now starting to see any visibility on a pickup and renewal?
So it's good to look at FDI in terms of longer-term trends rather than the yearly ups and downs, because sometimes one or two big deals can, lead to a upside which may be temporary. If you see it as a percentage of our GDP, you'll find that in 2014 we were at about 2.6% of the GDP. In the next 5 years, it became about 3.5%. Now it is close to 4%. There is a slight dip in the current year, which we feel is due to a combination of geopolitical factors, hardening of interest rates abroad, due to the sticky inflation conditions in some of the developed countries. So there is a slight dip this year. The dip is far less in India as compared to many of the other competing destinations. But from the Government of India's point of view, the real issue is that in terms of overall FDI flows, we are 8th in the world. We should be going up. Most of the 7 who are ahead of us are developed countries, but there are 1 or 2 developing countries in that list. Our intention is to sort of really move up there, because this is the time when the world is looking at India. By all accounts, we provide a fairly sort of clear case for investment in terms of the both the policy stability and continuity, as well as the political stability and the macroeconomic numbers that India has. So it's a compelling case for FDI, and we are very confident that the trend I mentioned of an increasing portion of our GDP coming in as FDI will continue.
You talked about being at number 8 at this point in time, and the aspiration, I would imagine, is to break into the top 5 at least. You also spoke about the fact that there is a dominance as far as the developed economies are concerned, but there are other developing economies that are part of that top 10 list as well. If you were to do an assessment of what needs to be changed in order for us to be able to continue to draw in FDI versus, for instance, some of these other developing economies that we are competing against, outside of logistics costs, which has, of course, been raised as one of the key concerns, one of the key challenges, what are the other things that can be fixed? What are the fixable items at this point in time that the government should address and is addressing?
So, the things like the ease of doing business is a sort of ongoing process. It never sort of, you can never say that it's done. There are, in our country, the very fact that we have rankings across states and the fact that there are differential FDI and concentrated in some of our southern and western states and not in others, that itself shows that the business environment and climate varies across states. So first of all, we need to improve this environment across the country, particularly in the eastern and the northeastern parts of our country. Besides that, as I mentioned, government needs to continue to focus on the things that it is already doing, whether it is ease of doing business, whether it is further liberalizing our FDI policy, whether it is in terms of ensuring that where compliances are required by the regulators, that compliance is ensured through a facilitated compliance, which means that if somebody does end up with a violation of a regulation, we don't necessarily treat him as a, we don't necessarily have to start punishing him. There could be a case where we flag it first, then we facilitate him in ensuring that the compliance is achieved. And I'm mentioning this particularly because we just had a recent issue, and I'm going to mention this before you raise it, which is, in the fintech sector, for which the Honorable Finance Minister sort of proactively took a meeting with the startups and the other fintechs in that space, where we tried to essentially tell them and reassure them that in addition to sort of ensuring that they get better sensitization of the regulation through a mechanism where the RBI will be meeting them every month, but also in terms of, as I said, a facilitated compliance where you could flag cases where there are minor sort of technical variations or violations of regulations, and we help them achieve those compliances rather than necessarily penalize them.
Since you raised the issue of the Paytm Payments Bank, and there was an outreach that was done by the Finance Ministry, and of course you were part of that meeting as well with fintechs. I want to understand from you, you said that the effort on the part of the government or the regulator is not to penalize, but in this case specifically, the regulator said enough and more opportunities were given for compliance, and the action was taken because there was perpetual non-compliance. So what was the feedback that you got? I mean, is it because of the complexity of the kind of rules that are in place that fintechs seem to find it challenging to comply, or is it a lack of understanding, or is it a lack of appreciation of what the regulator expects in terms of good compliance?
So, I mean, when it comes to startups, of course, these are people who often move very fast, whose business has expanded suddenly, and sometimes the compliance portion of it is perhaps not taken as seriously in some cases. The specific case that you mentioned, I don't want to spend time on that so much because I really don't know the details of that particular issue, but I understand that they were given adequate opportunities. The general sort of impression that we got from the fintech companies who attended that meeting was that they would like to understand the regulations better, which of course we created a mechanism for that purpose on the spot by the Honorable Finance Minister for a monthly meeting to update them and sensitize them about regulations. There were also suggestions about technical violations not being penalized and helping them to achieve compliance. That also we decided that, for example, you have a sectoral cap on FDI of 49%, and you go up and down because of market trends or investment trends.
Yeah.
There again, we've been asked to sort of work with RBI to create a mechanism where we flag those and help them achieve a kind of a facilitated compliance over time, so as not to disrupt things further. So I think government is listening, and we would like to sort of ensure that this very dynamic startup ecosystem is not sort of burdened either by too much of compliance or by a lack of knowledge about what the compliance burden is. And that particular meeting, I thought, went off very well in the sense that there was a tremendous sense of reassurance that the fintech community got as a result of that meeting.
So if I may just ask you a last question on this. On the back of the conversations that happened, is there a feeling that perhaps regulation is stifling innovation, or there needs to be less regulation or less complexity as far as compliance is concerned?
The latter, I think. There could always be some areas of compliance which could be simplified or which could be digitized. And I remember there was one specific sort of case that came up in that meeting, which was about KYC compliances and whether that should be digitized. And it was a little surprising, frankly, that it's not digitized in the banking space. Whereas when we take a mobile connection, for example, we do go through some kind of a KYC process, which is largely digital. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the areas where we could simplify forms, we could digitize the processes, and of course we could make people understand better what the regulations are. And I think the sense of that meeting and the instructions given by the Honorable FM was that we should work on ensuring that combination of simplification and digitization in areas that perhaps have still remained untouched in some areas but not in others. As a whole, I would say India has done a great job in digitization, in creating a digital public infrastructure, which is really where the first mover is actually the government, and the private sector thereafter comes in and uses that infrastructure to develop use cases and benefit from it. But there could be areas or segments where, that online servicing, digitization will still need to be done.
On exports, and part of the Make in India campaign, of course, is the idea of making in India for the world, and we're seeing that play out across different sectors. I'll just bring up the example of a conversation that I had with the global CEO of IKEA just yesterday, and of course they are procuring and have been procuring from India as part of their export strategy for the world. But they believe that perhaps that number could be significantly higher if, for instance, there was a harmonization as far as quality control issues are concerned. A comment on that across different sectors on where you believe harmonization is the way forward so that we can truly encourage greater exports.
Yeah, so India has not been using quality control norms much over the years. It's only in the last couple of years that we really started issuing quality control orders across the board with the conviction that our consumers deserve to be provided quality products, whether by local manufacturers or from imports. That process is a painful one for many businesses who are not used to going through a BIS inspection of ensuring that their processes and their products meet the quality control norms that are given. I think over time, we have to ensure that we become a quality conscious industry and society. We cannot continue to fob off substandard goods on our consumers, including from the point of view of consumer safety. So all I will say is that DPIIT and government in general is going to increasingly use quality control orders. The intention is also to prevent dumping of unsafe and substandard products from other countries, and including one of our largest competitors. That process has helped us in some areas like toys, for example, where the combination of QCOs and some tariffs actually led to a resurgence of the domestic industry. We will probably be using quality control orders even more vigorously in the future. On the issue of IKEA and harmonization with global standards, that is a genuine request, and we'll ensure that BIS looks at that to ensure that we are not creating standards which are out of line or out of sync with global standards.
You talked about our competitor and our neighbor as well as the move that we are seeing towards de-risking supply chains globally in a post-COVID era, and how geopolitics is also playing a part in that. There was a view that we should keep all investments off the table from that particular jurisdiction. There has been a review of that and a pragmatic review of that in order for us to actually facilitate making in India. Do you believe that perhaps a further review is required on that front as well, so that we don't again end up losing out to other developing economies?
Okay, so there's never been a blanket ban on investment from our land border countries. It includes the country that you mentioned. There's only been a case-to-case approval, a scrutiny process involving our various agencies to ensure that if they do come in, they come in areas which are of interest to us, which actually help us improve our manufacturing capacities. Whether that requires, because it is case by case, in any case, the interministerial consultation that we do does try to sort of nuance this out to ensure that there's no blanket ban, and in areas where we need such inputs from their side, we do allow it. Whether we can nuance it further is something that we'll be looking at in a continuous manner. In terms of besides the FDI policy, there are issues about global supply chains in terms of industry-facing issues when it comes to, getting machinery from China and thereafter getting it installed through Chinese technicians, those kind of issues. Wherever the private sector wants to access capital goods from China and thereafter it needs some help in terms of getting them installed, including issuing of visas for technicians. All of those DPIIT is willing to look at and is recommending with an open mind to our agencies to ensure that wherever Chinese manpower is required in critical areas to build up our manufacturing capacities, that need not necessarily be stopped. There are other areas in terms of FDI, or in terms of control, including management control, where we'll be much more conservative and we'll need to look at on a case-to-case basis. But in other areas, we are willing to look at it in a much more nuanced manner.
Speaking of a nuanced manner of policy interventions and policy initiatives, let me ask you this in the context of what's happening on the electric vehicle side, and we are still awaiting clarity from the government on a new EV policy, which creates a level playing field, and of course it will not be on a case-by-case basis, is what we're given to understand as well. But the demand from a lot of the global manufacturers, or in particular one global manufacturer, is that, look, don't mandate to start with domestic manufacturing, bring down tariffs, let us import at a lower duty and then get demand visibility before we actually set up domestic manufacturing. What's the DPIIT view on this?
Actually, it's not a single manufacturer anymore. Now there are two of them, and I won't mention who those two are, but yeah.
We know one.
Yeah, so you can try and guess the other one. So, as I said, there are a couple of requests on those lines. It's a very contested sort of policy space because we have a strong domestic automobile sector, which also has investment plans in this area. So I would only say at this stage that government has not taken a final view on this as to how to do it, how to sort of, do this trade-off which will have some disruptive impact, but which also has some, there are benefits and costs in going down that route. And government really hasn't taken a final call on this as yet.
Mr. Singh, always a pleasure. Many, many thanks for giving us very comprehensive but a very clear roadmap on what we can expect the government to focus on going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the DPIIT Secretary. Thank you very much for your time.